great viewers of the YouTube world. Thank you for joining me today. I wanted to talk about a book that I'm rereading. In my opinion, a classic. And that book is Post Office by Charles Bukowski. Charles Bukowski's first ever novel, published in 1971, after he was offered money by a gentleman named John Martin. John Martin was an admirer of Bukowski's poetry, and he actually formed his own publishing company, Black Sparrow Press, purely for the sake of publishing Charles Bukowski's poetry. And he didn't feel that it was enough, wasn't quite there, so he offered Bukowski $100 per month for the rest of his life if he would give up his job and focus on writing. And of course, Charles Bukowski was working at the post office, and he did the calculations, and he decided that he was probably earning something like $160, $170 a month at the post office back in 1969, 1970. And so he took the offer, and in less than a month he produced Post Office, of course writing about his time at the post office. And it's a very quick read. I read this book in the last 3 days, I think, and that wasn't really applying a massive amount of time to reading. And it really had me laughing out loud. I mean, I'd forgotten how funny it is. And so, cheers to Bukowski. Raise a glass and have a sip, a toast in his honor. But it's also true to say that it is quite controversial being published back in 1971. Of course, things were a little bit different back then. I know there have been several or multiple accusations of misogyny and so on. And so Charles Bukowski, of course, resorts to a level of humor that sometimes can be insulting, but he also shows a true sensitive side. He really cares for animals, for example, cats and dogs. He really goes out of his way to care for them. But not only that, even in a work environment where people are saying, oh, this guy's the greatest, some guy's the hardest worker, the greatest worker, and the guy, practically this particular colleague of Charles Bukowski's at the time, has a breakdown at work and nobody notices. Everybody just ignores him. And Bukowski runs over to him, or the protagonist, Henry Chinaski, runs over to him and says, hey, are you okay? Do you need any help? And he runs to the supervisor and he says, hey, the guy needs help. We need to get him help. And the supervisor says, who's going to be doing his route today? And he says, forget about the route. The guy needs help. That's just classic Bukowski. Hilarious, always drunk, always fighting, but yet deeply sentimental, deeply caring. And the book, of course, also goes into some very deep, sad scenes. For example, where essentially the love of his life pretty much drank herself to death. But even this, Bukowski doesn't linger on it. He jumps to the funeral, and the funeral becomes almost a Big Lebowski style comedic scene. And before you know it, a few pages on, you're laughing out loud once again. And so, Charles Bukowski's first novel, Post Office, if you haven't read it, be sure to go and purchase a copy, get a copy from your library, borrow it from a friend, and just enjoy the raucous ride that is Bukowski's first novel, Post Office. And thank you for watching.